Before we begin, listen carefully. If you love dark saint stories, true spiritual battles, and real encounters between heaven and hell, please subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification bell and comment below where you're watching from. I read your comments, and they help me understand how far these stories reach across the world. Now, let me take you into the shadows. Saint Catherine of Siena was not born in a monastery, not raised in silence, and not protected from darkness. She was born into noise, chaos, temptation, and a world already crawling with unseen enemies. And long before she became a doctor of the church, long before popes listened to her words, demons noticed her first. Catherine was born in 1347 in Siena, Italy, during a time when death walked openly in the streets. Plague, war, famine, and fear ruled Europe. She was the 23rd child in a crowded household, and from the beginning, her life felt insignificant to everyone, except heaven and hell. As a child, she had visions of Christ that were gentle and luminous. But where light appears, darkness always follows. What began as divine encounters soon turned into something far more terrifying. By the time Catherine was a teenager, she made a secret vow of virginity to God. She refused marriage, beauty, and worldly attention. And that decision, quiet, hidden, whispered only to heaven, triggered a response from the abyss. The demons did not appear with horns and fire at first. They came with thoughts, images, and voices that felt like her own. At night, when her family slept, Catherine would kneel in her room and pray. That was when the first assaults began. Obscene visions invaded her mind without warning. Violent, humiliating images meant to defile her soul. She would suddenly see scenes so filthy she could barely breathe. Faces twisted in lust, bodies tangled in sin, voices whispering shame into her ears, telling her she was disgusting for even thinking such things. The demons knew exactly how to attack a pure soul, not by force, but by corruption. Catherine later wrote that these visions were not fantasies, not dreams, and not imagination. They were forced upon her, sudden and aggressive, appearing even while she prayed. The more she resisted, the worse they became. Sometimes the images lasted for hours. Sometimes they returned every few minutes like waves crashing against her mind. She would press her face to the floor, crying, begging God to make them stop. But heaven was silent, and that silence was part of the trial. As days passed, the attacks escalated. The demons began to mock her verbally. She heard laughter in empty rooms. She heard her name whispered when no one was there. They told her she was a hypocrite, that her prayers were meaningless, that God had abandoned her. They threatened that she would fall eventually, that purity never lasts. And worst of all, they accused her of enjoying the visions, twisting her fear into guilt. Catherine began to doubt herself. She questioned whether God had turned away, whether she was secretly sinful, whether the visions meant she was already condemned. This is how demons work, not just attacking the body or the senses, but slowly eroding the soul's confidence in God. Physically, she weakened. She ate very little. Sleep became impossible. Her body trembled during prayer. Her face grew pale, her eyes hollow. Her family thought she was sick, perhaps possessed by madness. They tried to force her into normal life, into marriage, into distraction. But Catherine withdrew deeper inward, clinging to prayer like a drowning person clings to air. Then the demons changed tactics. They began to appear more vividly, still unseen by others, but real to her senses. She felt presences crowding her room, heavy, oppressive, watching. Sometimes she smelled foul odors, like decay and sulfur. Sometimes the air felt thick, suffocating, as if something invisible was pressing against her chest. They no longer only tempted her, they threatened her. They told her she would go insane. They told her she would die alone. They told her that Christ was laughing at her suffering. One voice claimed to be God himself, commanding her to stop praying. Catherine nearly obeyed, until she remembered that God never speaks with cruelty. That realization saved her from total collapse. Still, the torment did not stop. One night, exhausted and broken, Catherine collapsed on the floor of her room. Her mind was filled with filth she never chose. Her heart felt hollow, and in that moment, she screamed, not politely, not reverently, but desperately, asking Christ why he allowed this, why he watched as demons tore her apart from the inside. There was no vision, no voice, no comfort, only darkness. And that darkness would deepen, because this was only the beginning. By the time Catherine of Siena reached her late teens, the demons had already mapped her soul. They knew her weaknesses. They knew her desires, not the sinful ones, but the holy ones. And that was exactly why their attacks became more perverse, more violent, and more relentless. This was no longer temptation. This was warfare. Every time Catherine knelt to pray, the attacks intensified. The moment she whispered the name of Jesus, her mind was flooded with obscene images, acts she had never seen, never imagined, never desired. They came suddenly, like knives slicing into her thoughts. The demons twisted sacred moments into shame-filled experiences. While she prayed the Our Father, visions of corruption mocked her purity. While she meditated on Christ's wounds, lustful images tried to replace the cross. Catherine later said that these were not ordinary temptations. They were intrusive, violent, and forced, leaving her nauseated and trembling. She would physically gag during prayer. Her body reacted with disgust, but her soul felt stained. And that was the demon's goal, not pleasure, but humiliation. They spoke to her directly now. "You pretend to be holy," they hissed. "Look at what fills your mind. This is who you really are." They accused her of secret sin, insisting that the visions proved her corruption. And when she denied them, they laughed. The laughter echoed inside her skull, sharp and cruel, like metal scraping stone. Catherine began to fear prayer itself, not because she doubted God, but because prayer had become the doorway through which hell entered. Still, she did not stop. That defiance enraged them. The demons began to invade her physical senses. At night, Catherine felt hands grabbing her, pinning her down, though no one was there. She felt breath on her neck. She felt weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Sometimes her bed shook violently, as if something unseen was pacing around her, circling like a predator. The attacks were calculated. When she fasted, they tempted her with food. When she ate, they accused her of gluttony. When she slept, they invaded her dreams with terror and filth. When she stayed awake, they exhausted her with noise, whispers, screams, mocking prayers twisted into blasphemy. Her room, once a place of refuge, became a battlefield. There were nights when Catherine screamed so loudly that her family rushed to her door. But when they entered, everything was calm. No signs of struggle, no visible enemy. Catherine could not explain what had happened without sounding insane. And so she suffered alone, trapped between a world that could not see her torment and an enemy that never slept. The demons began to threaten her future. They told her she would never escape them, that even death would not bring peace. They described hell in graphic detail, not as fire alone, but as endless humiliation, souls stripped of dignity, mocked eternally. They told her she belonged there, that God allowed this because he despised her. These words cut deeper than the visions. Because Catherine loved God intensely, the thought that he permitted this out of disgust shattered her spirit. She began to weep uncontrollably during prayer, sometimes for hours. Her tears soaked the floor. Her voice grew hoarse from begging. She asked Christ why he was silent while demons spoke so loudly. But heaven still did not answer, and the silence felt deliberate. The demons used that silence as proof of their lies. If he cared, they said, he would stop us. They mocked her endurance, telling her that saints are supposed to feel peace, not terror. They twisted holiness into doubt, convincing her that real sanctity meant comfort, and since she had none, she must be a failure. At the peak of this torment, Catherine reached a breaking point. One night, overwhelmed by filth and despair, she collapsed on the stone floor of her room. She stopped fighting the images, not because she accepted them, but because she had no strength left. She lay there, shaking, empty, and numb. For the first time, she did not pray with words. She simply whispered, "I cannot do this anymore." That moment terrified the demons, because surrender to despair is what they wanted, but surrender to weakness before God was something else entirely. They intensified the assault, unleashing everything at once. Visions, voices, physical pressure, fear, shame, exhaustion, all crashing down like a storm. Catherine felt as if her soul were being torn apart. And yet, in that absolute darkness, something unexpected happened. She realized something profound. Despite everything, she had not sinned. The visions were forced. The thoughts were unwanted. The attacks were external. Her will, though exhausted, still clung to God. And that realization became a small flame in the darkness. Weak, trembling, but alive. She began to resist again, not with emotion, not with strength, but with choice. "I choose you," she whispered. The demons recoiled, not fleeing yet, but shaken. Because holiness is not measured by peace, but by fidelity under torment. And Catherine was proving unbreakable. But the worst was still to come. Because what followed was not just temptation, not just harassment, but a long, deliberate abandonment, where Christ himself would seem to disappear completely. There came a season in Catherine of Siena's life when the demons changed again. Not louder, not more obscene, but more confident. They no longer rushed. They no longer screamed. They spoke slowly now, calmly, as if victory were already certain. Because something had changed. Christ was gone. Not physically. He had never been physically present, but experientially. The warmth Catherine once felt in prayer vanished. The sweetness of devotion disappeared. The inner light that once guided her went dark. Her prayers felt like words thrown into a void. No response, no peace, no consolation. And the demons noticed immediately. "This is what abandonment feels like," they whispered. "This is the truth behind your faith. He used you, and now he is done." They told her the silence was proof. Proof that Christ had withdrawn his protection. Proof that her suffering was pointless. Proof that the visions, the torment, the humiliation had all been for nothing. And because Catherine had no consolation to contradict them, their words sank deep. This was not a single night. This was months. Month after month, Catherine prayed without feeling, fasted without strength, wept without relief. She continued her acts of charity, tending the sick, the dying, the plague-ridden, while internally feeling hollow, almost dead. Outwardly, she looked like a saint. Inwardly, she felt like a soul already buried. The demons began to mock her endurance. "You still kneel? You still fast? You still believe?" They told her that real saints are rewarded with joy, not emptiness. That only the rejected are left in silence. They suggested that Christ was watching her suffering with indifference, or worse, with satisfaction. This idea cut her more deeply than any obscene vision ever had. Because pain can be endured, but meaningless pain destroys. There were moments when Catherine felt tempted to stop praying entirely. Not because she hated God, but because prayer itself had become agony. Each time she knelt, the demons returned, louder in the absence of divine consolation. They filled the silence with accusations. They reminded her of every moment of weakness. They replayed the obscene visions, telling her they would never leave. At times, Catherine felt physically sick from the despair. Her body wasted away. She ate almost nothing. Her limbs grew weak. Her face became gaunt. Those who saw her thought she was dying. And in a way, she was dying to every comfort, every certainty, every emotional support. In this long night, Catherine began to question herself more deeply than ever before. What if I imagined God? What if my childhood visions were illusions? What if this is the truth? These thoughts terrified her, not because she wanted to believe them, but because they felt plausible. That is the most dangerous weapon of darkness. Not terror, but reason without light. The demons used logic now. They argued that suffering proves absence, that silence proves abandonment, that unanswered prayer proves futility. They built their case carefully, dismantling her faith piece by piece, like lawyers prosecuting her soul. And Catherine had no defense, except naked trust. She stopped asking for relief. Instead, she began to pray something new. "Lord," she whispered, "if you are here, stay hidden. If you are gone, let me still remain faithful." This prayer enraged the demons. They wanted her to curse God, to collapse in despair, to accuse heaven of cruelty. But she refused. She accepted the darkness without understanding it. She accepted the pain without explanation. She accepted the silence without rebellion. And this is where the battle turned invisible. Because unknown to Catherine, her endurance was not weakness, it was power. Still, the demons launched one final psychological assault. They told her that Christ had been present the entire time, but deliberately distant. That he allowed her suffering not to strengthen her, but to test how much pain she could endure before breaking. They painted God as cold, calculating, distant. This idea nearly destroyed her. One night, completely alone, Catherine fell to the ground and cried out, not in anger, but in raw honesty. She told Christ she felt abandoned, that she did not understand, that she could not see his purpose. And then she said something that would define her sanctity forever. Even if you are the cause of this pain, she said, I will still love you. The room fell silent. No demons spoke. No visions appeared. For the first time in months, there was nothing. And in that nothingness, something shifted. Because when a soul loves God without consolation, without reward, without explanation, that love is no longer dependent. It is pure, and hell cannot stand purity. What happens next is not a dramatic escape, not an instant victory, but a revelation so powerful that it will redefine Catherine's suffering forever. After months, perhaps longer, of silence, torment, and abandonment, Catherine of Siena no longer expected comfort. She no longer prayed for visions. She no longer begged for relief. Her faith had been stripped down to its final core, choice without reward. And it was at that moment, when she expected nothing, that heaven finally broke its silence. It did not happen with thunder. It did not happen with light filling the room. It happened quietly. Catherine was praying, as she always did, weak, exhausted, and empty. And suddenly, she became aware of a presence that was not oppressive, not mocking, not invasive. A presence that did not force itself upon her. A presence that simply was. Christ appeared to her, not as a judge, not as a warrior, but as one who had been watching in silence the entire time. Catherine collapsed, overwhelmed, not with joy at first, but with grief. All the pain she had endured flooded her heart at once. And the first thing she said was not praise, but a question that had burned in her soul for so long. Where were you? Christ did not rebuke her. He did not explain immediately. Instead, he let her speak. He let her pour out everything. The visions, the obscenity, the humiliation, the voices, the despair, the sense of abandonment. And when she finally fell silent, emptied of words, Christ answered her in a way that would define her entire theology. I was with you, he said, the whole time. Catherine trembled. She told him she had felt nothing, that she had heard nothing, that the demons had tormented her without restraint. And Christ replied with words that shattered the power the demons had claimed for themselves. They had no power over you, except what I allowed. This was not said cruelly. It was said truthfully. Christ explained that the demons could not touch her soul. They could not force sin. They could not corrupt her will. They could only attack her senses, her imagination, her emotions. And even that, they could do only by permission, not because God delights in suffering, but because suffering endured in love purifies the soul more deeply than consolation ever could. Then Christ revealed the most painful truth of all. He told her that he had withdrawn consolation deliberately, not as punishment, not as abandonment, but as protection. If I had remained felt, he said, you would have endured for my sweetness. But I wanted you to endure for love alone. Catherine understood then why the demons had grown so desperate, why they had mocked so loudly, why they had lied so confidently. They believed silence meant absence, but silence had been the very space where her love became invincible. Christ told her that every obscene vision she rejected increased her purity. Every accusation she endured without hatred strengthened her humility. Every prayer she whispered into silence deepened her union with him. The demons had believed they were winning, but they had been forging a saint. And then Christ addressed the lie that had haunted her most. You thought I was far, he said, but I was closest when you felt me least. At that moment, Catherine saw, not with her physical eyes, but with spiritual clarity, that Christ had been present in every attack, watching, limiting, preventing what could have destroyed her. The demons had screamed because they were restrained. They had lied because truth would have revealed their weakness. And then Christ said the words Catherine would remember for the rest of her life. Never believe that demons have power without my permission. They are instruments, not masters. With that revelation, the fear that had gripped Catherine for years dissolved. Not instantly, but permanently. The demons did not vanish dramatically. They simply lost authority. Their voices grew weaker. Their presence faded. And Catherine emerged from the long night transformed. She was no longer afraid of darkness, because she knew it could not exist without God's allowance. From that moment on, Catherine's life took on a new intensity. She spoke with authority, not arrogance, but certainty. She confronted popes. She rebuked corruption. She carried suffering without complaint. And when demons returned, as they sometimes did, she no longer trembled. She knew who ruled the battlefield. Catherine of Siena did not defeat demons by force. She defeated them by endurance, humility, and love without consolation. And that is why hell feared her. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or strengthened you, comment below. Tell me how far you reached. Tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications, because there are more stories like this. Stories that reveal the unseen war around every soul. This was not just the story of Saint Catherine of Siena. This was a warning and an invitation. Because the same truth remains today. Darkness has no power unless heaven allows it.